Rain slammed against the rusted metal roof, each drop echoing like gunfire through Ethan Cole's dim garage. Wind pushed cold air inside as a pair of bright headlights cut through the darkness. Too clean, too expensive for a place like this. A black SUV rolled in slowly, engine sputtering, then dying with a hollow choke. Ethan wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag and stepped forward out of habit, then stopped. In the back seat, a teenage girl sat perfectly still. Metal braces locked around her legs, stiff and unforgiving. Every slight movement of the car made her jaw tighten, like she was bracing for pain she'd learned to hide. The driver's door swung open. A sharply dressed woman stepped out, already mid-call, her voice clipped and irritated. "No, reschedule it. I'm stuck here. Yes, now." Ethan barely heard her. His focus had shifted. He crouched beside the open door, eyes narrowing on the girl's legs, the angle, the pressure points. Wrong. Completely wrong. The girl flinched again. Ethan leaned closer, voice calm but firm. "Why didn't they fix this?" The woman snapped her head toward him. "Excuse me." The girl looked up, unsure, caught between strangers and silence. Ethan met her eyes, softer now. "Does it hurt?" Everything went still, because in that moment someone had finally noticed, and nothing was going to stay the same. Subscribe to Just Dad Things for more powerful single dad stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Ethan Cole's alarm never had to ring. He was always awake before it. Sometimes it was the cold that did it, the kind that crept through thin walls and settled into your bones. Other times it was the weight in his chest, the quiet pressure of responsibility that never really let him rest. But most mornings it was Lily, soft humming from the kitchen, a chair scraping gently across the floor, the careful clink of a spoon against a bowl as she tried every single day to make breakfast the way she remembered her mom used to. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, 8 years old, small frame, messy hair tied into something that tried to be a ponytail, focused like it mattered more than anything in the world. "Morning, kiddo," he said, forcing warmth into his voice. Lily turned instantly, her face lighting up. "I made eggs. I think they're better today." He smiled, even before tasting them. "Then today's a good day." That's how it worked. Not because things were good, but because she believed they could be. Their house sat at the edge of Brook Hollow, where the paved roads slowly gave up and turned into gravel. It wasn't much faded siding, a front step that creaked, windows that let in more cold than they kept out, but it was theirs. Or at least, it felt like it was. The truth sat quietly on the kitchen counter. Stacked envelopes, final notices, late payments. Ethan didn't open them right away anymore. He'd learned that the numbers didn't change just because he stared at them longer. Rent, utilities, parts for the garage, everything came with a cost, and everything seemed to arrive at once. The garage kept them afloat. Barely. Some weeks were good. A few steady customers. Enough work to keep the lights on. Other weeks, silence. Empty bays. Tools sitting untouched while hours slipped by. And on those weeks, Ethan made adjustments. Smaller meals. Skipped meals. Extra hours that didn't always lead to extra pay. Lily never noticed, or at least she never said anything. She talked about school, about a book she was reading, about how one day she wanted to build things like her dad, but better, she always added with a grin. Ethan laughed every time, because he needed to, because if he didn't, he might start thinking too much. About what would happen if the garage closed, if rent slipped too far behind, if someone knocked on the door one day with papers he couldn't ignore. Stability wasn't guaranteed. It was borrowed, and every day he felt like he was one mistake away from losing it. But money wasn't the part that kept him up at night. It was something heavier, quieter, the kind of fear that didn't show up in numbers. It showed up in moments, like when Lily reached for his hand without looking completely sure he'd be there, or when she said things like, "You always fix things, Dad," with a kind of certainty that didn't leave room for failure. That kind of belief, it wasn't something you could afford to break. Ethan had broken something like that before. He didn't talk about it, didn't need to. It lived in the spaces between his thoughts. His younger brother, Jake. There had been a time when Jake laughed the same way Lily did. Loud, unfiltered, like the world hadn't had a chance to take anything from him yet. Then things changed. An illness that came fast. Treatment that came with a price. Ethan couldn't reach in time. He worked harder back then, too. Took extra shifts. Promised himself it would be enough. It wasn't. By the time help came, it didn't matter anymore. That memory didn't fade. It sharpened. Every time Ethan saw Lily smile, every time she trusted him without hesitation, it reminded him what failure actually looked like. Not missed payments, not a closed garage, but the moment someone you love looks at you and you don't have the answer. So Ethan didn't allow himself to fail, not out loud, not where she could see it. He fixed what he could, held together what he couldn't, and carried the rest quietly. Because to Lily, he wasn't just her dad. He was the solution. The one person who always knew what to do. And the truth? Ethan didn't know if that was real, but he knew one thing for certain. If that belief ever broke, it wouldn't just cost him everything he had. It would take the only thing he couldn't afford to lose. Charlotte Reynolds didn't belong anywhere near Brook Hollow. You could see it before she even spoke. The way she stepped out of the SUV, sharp, controlled, untouched by the mud pooling beneath her heels. The coat alone probably cost more than Ethan made in a month. Even in the rain, even stranded in the middle of nowhere, she carried herself like someone who was used to being listened to, used to being obeyed. Her voice cut clean through the storm as she ended her call. "Push the meeting to tomorrow morning. No excuses. I'll handle the delay." She didn't wait for a response before hanging up. Control, precision, authority. That was Charlotte Reynolds, CEO of NeuroStride Technologies, a company built on innovation, medical advancement, and the promise of mobility. Her devices were used in hospitals, rehabilitation centers, private clinics across the country. People trusted her work. Doctors stood behind it. Investors lined up for it. She had built that reputation herself, and she protected it with everything she had, which is why being stuck in a failing car in a town she'd never heard of, at a garage that looked like it might collapse in a strong wind, felt like more than an inconvenience. It felt like a disruption she couldn't afford. But frustration wasn't the only thing tightening her chest. It was what sat behind her. Ava. Charlotte didn't look back immediately. She didn't need to. She knew exactly how her daughter was sitting still, quiet, careful not to draw attention. Ava had learned that over the years, learned how to exist in spaces without interrupting them. 11 years. That's how long it had been. 11 years of specialists, consultations, therapies that promised progress and delivered very little. Every option explored, every expert trusted, every solution paid for without hesitation. If something could be done, Charlotte had done it, or at least she believed she had. Because belief was easier than doubt, and doubt was dangerous. Doubt meant something had been missed. So when Ethan spoke, when a mechanic in a dim garage suggested that something about Ava's brace wasn't right, Charlotte's reaction wasn't just dismissal, it was defense. Sharp, immediate, unyielding. "You're a mechanic," she said, her tone cutting through the space between them. "Stick to the engine." It wasn't cruel, it was controlled. a line drawn clearly without room for argument. Because to Charlotte, systems worked. Experts knew what they were doing, and anything outside that structure? It wasn't just unlikely, it was unacceptable. Ethan didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. That, more than anything, caught her off guard. Most people either backed down around her or pushed back harder. He did neither. He simply explained, calmly, carefully, not trying to prove her wrong, just trying to be understood. He pointed to the brace, the angle of the joint, the way pressure seemed to shift unnaturally when Ava moved, even slightly. He spoke in simple terms, not medical language, just observation, mechanics, motion. Things that made sense to him, things that made sense to him, things Charlotte had never considered. And for a brief moment, just a moment, she hesitated, because what he was saying didn't sound like a guess. It sounded certain, but certainty from the wrong person didn't matter. Not here, not in her world. Charlotte straightened slightly, her expression settling back into something firm and unreadable. If there was a problem, she said, more measured now, her doctors would have identified it. They always did. That was the system. That was what she trusted, what she had built her entire life around. Still, something didn't sit right. Not in Ethan's words, but in what followed them. Silence. Charlotte finally turned her attention to Ava, waiting, expecting her to dismiss it, to say something that would close the conversation, reinforce what Charlotte already believed. But Ava didn't speak. She didn't defend the brace, didn't confirm it was fine, didn't do anything at all. She just sat there, looking between them, quiet. And that quiet stretched longer than it should have, long enough to make something unfamiliar settle into Charlotte's chest. Not fear. Not yet. But something close to it, because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't completely sure. Ethan didn't try to prove anything. He didn't raise his voice, didn't argue, didn't push. He just went back to the car and fixed what he was supposed to fix. The engine, the wiring, the problem Charlotte had actually come in for. His hands moved with quiet precision, steady despite the cold, despite the tension still hanging in the air. Every bolt tightened, every connection checked twice. No shortcuts, no wasted motion. Work first. That's how he'd always done it. Only when the engine finally turned over smoothly again did Ethan step back, wiping his hands slowly on the same worn rag. For a moment, it looked like he was done, like he'd let it go. But he didn't. He glanced once toward the back seat, then back at Charlotte. There was hesitation there, not uncertainty, but awareness. He knew exactly how this sounded, who he was, who she was. Still, he asked. Just one adjustment, he said quietly. Nothing permanent. If it doesn't feel right, we stop. Charlotte didn't even look at him at first. No. The answer came instantly, clean, final. But Ethan didn't move. Didn't argue either. He simply stood there, waiting not for her but for something else. And then, "It does hurt." The voice was soft, almost too soft to carry over the fading sound of rain. But it did. Charlotte turned sharply. "Ava, it always does," Ava added, a little stronger this time. Not angry, not emotional, just honest. The kind of honesty that didn't ask permission. Charlotte's expression shifted just slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough to break the certainty she'd been holding on to. She looked at Ethan again, really looked this time, at his hands, the oil stains, the quiet patience in his posture, the fact that he hadn't once tried to sell himself as something he wasn't. Then she exhaled slowly. "One adjustment," she said. "I stay here. You explain everything before you do it." Ethan nodded once. That was all he needed. The garage settled into a different kind of silence after that. Not tense, focused. Lily appeared quietly from the side door, wrapping her sweater tighter around herself as she stepped in. She didn't ask questions. She just took her usual spot near the workbench, pulling out a small notebook and a pencil. Watching. Ethan got to work. Not fast, not flashy, careful. He crouched beside Ava's brace, studying it like it was a puzzle that had already told him the answer. He just needed to confirm it. His fingers traced the edges, the joints, the way each piece connected to the next. He didn't talk much, only when necessary. "Tell me if anything feels tight," he said. Ava nodded. Charlotte stood a few feet away, arms crossed, every movement Ethan made reflected in her eyes. She watched like someone used to catching mistakes before they happened, but there were none. Ethan didn't remove the brace completely, didn't rebuild it from scratch. He adjusted. Small changes, angles, pressure points, the way the support aligned with natural movement instead of forcing against it. It wasn't theory. It was instinct shaped by years of understanding how things were supposed to move and what happened when they didn't. Time passed without anyone noticing. The rain stopped. The wind faded. Even the sounds of the town beyond the garage seemed to quiet down, like everything had narrowed to this one moment. At some point, Lily stood up and walked over, placing a small cup of water near Ethan without a word. He didn't look up, but his hand found it anyway. "Thanks, kiddo." She smiled, then went back to her seat. Charlotte noticed that. The ease of it, the rhythm between them. It didn't look like someone trying to impress anyone. It looked like someone who had done this 1,000 times before, just in different ways. Finally, Ethan leaned back slightly. "Okay," he said. "That's it." Charlotte stepped forward immediately. "What did you change?" "Alignment," Ethan replied simply. It was forcing her body to fight itself. Charlotte frowned slightly, processing. "And now?" Ethan looked at Ava. "Now we see." There was no build-up, no dramatic pause, just a quiet shift in attention. Ava placed her hands on the sides of the seat, preparing the way she always did. Careful. Controlled. Expecting resistance before it even came. Charlotte instinctively moved closer, ready to catch her, ready for the same outcome they'd seen 100 times before. Ava pushed herself up, and then nothing happened. No sharp inhale, no tightening of her shoulders, no flicker of pain across her face. She was standing, still, balanced. Her legs didn't tremble under pressure. Her body didn't fight the brace. For the first time in years, it wasn't working against her. Charlotte's breath caught, but she didn't speak. Didn't want to break it. Ava blinked, like she wasn't entirely sure it was real. Then slowly, carefully, she shifted her weight. Still no pain. Her eyes lifted to Ethan. Confused. Hopeful. "Is it supposed to feel like this?" she asked quietly. Ethan gave a small nod. "That's how it's supposed to start." Charlotte turned to him, something unsteady finally breaking through the control she'd held so tightly. Not relief, not belief, not yet. But something had changed. Because for the first time in 11 years, the system hadn't been the one to get it right. He had. And that possibility was louder than anything she could ignore. Hope didn't arrive gently. It surged in fast, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. And that made it dangerous, because once it was there, it demanded more. Charlotte felt it the moment Ava stood without pain, not relief, not yet, but something sharper, urgent, alive. If this could happen once, then it could happen again. Better, faster, fist. "We don't wait," Charlotte said the next morning, her voice already back in control. "If this is working, we move forward." Ethan didn't answer right away. He was studying the brace again, fingers lightly pressing along the joints, checking how Ava's weight had shifted since the night before. "It's not that simple," he said finally. "Her body's adjusting. We need to give it time." "How much time?" Ethan glanced at Ava, then back at Charlotte. "Days. Maybe longer." Charlotte shook her head immediately. "We don't have days." There it was, the difference between them. Ethan worked in patience. Charlotte operated on timelines, deadlines, results. And right now, she wasn't thinking like a mother. She was thinking like someone who had spent her entire life solving problems by pushing harder. So they moved forward. Too fast. The second version came together under pressure. Charlotte stayed in the garage the entire time, pacing, taking calls, watching every adjustment like it was a step toward something she needed to control. Ethan worked differently this time. Still careful, still precise, but there was tension in his movements now. A quiet hesitation. He double-checked measurements more than usual, paused longer between adjustments, looked at Ava more often, like he was trying to read something that numbers couldn't tell him. Lily noticed. She always did. She stayed quieter than usual, sitting near the wall, her notebook untouched in her lap. Her eyes moved between her dad and the brace, picking up on things no one was saying out loud. "Are you sure?" she asked once, softly. Ethan gave her a small nod. But it wasn't the same kind of certainty as before. By late afternoon, it was ready. Or at least, as ready as it could be under the circumstances. Charlotte stepped forward immediately. "Let's try." Ethan didn't move. "She needs to go slow," he said. "Just standing first. Then we stop." Charlotte didn't respond. Her focus was already on Ava. "Ava," she said, her voice softer now but still carrying that edge of urgency, "let's see what you can do." Ava looked between them, between pressure and caution. Then she nodded. She placed her hands on the sides of the seat again, preparing herself the same way she always did. But this time, there was something different in her expression. Expectation, hope, and maybe a little fear of losing it. Ethan stepped closer just in case. "Slow," he reminded quietly. Ava pushed herself up. For a second, it worked. She stood, balanced. No immediate pain. Charlotte's breath caught again, just like before, but this time she didn't wait. "Take a step," she said. Ethan turned sharply. "No." Ava shifted her weight. One small movement. That was all it took. The alignment faltered. The brace didn't respond the way it should have. And suddenly, everything gave out. Ava dropped hard to the concrete. The sound was sharp, final, echoing through the garage like something breaking. Charlotte rushed forward instantly, panic hitting before anything else. "Ava!" She dropped to her knees, pulling her daughter back, checking her arms, her face, her legs. Ava winced, her breath uneven, tears already forming at the edges of her eyes. Not just from the fall, but from the pain that followed it. It was back, worse than before. Charlotte's fear flipped in an instant, into anger. "Stop!" she snapped, her voice cutting through the space like a blade. "Just stop!" Ethan stood frozen a few feet away. He hadn't moved fast enough, hadn't stopped it, hadn't protected her. And in that split second, everything collapsed inward. Jake, that hospital room, that moment where he realized too late that trying wasn't enough. That sometimes you get it wrong, and people pay for it. Charlotte turned toward him, her expression no longer controlled. It was raw now. Furious. "You're hurting her," she said, each word landing heavier than the last. Ethan opened his mouth, but nothing came out, because there wasn't anything he could say that would undo what just happened. Ava clung to her mother slightly, her breathing shaky. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not to Ethan, to Charlotte. And that made it worse. Charlotte's gaze locked onto Ethan again, colder now, sharper. "You're not a doctor," she said. "No hesitation, no doubt. You're a mechanic, and this time." There was no space left between the words, no room for interpretation. Just truth as far as she was concerned. Ethan didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He simply stood there, the weight of it settling in fully, because, deep down, part of him believed it too. The garage felt different after that. Smaller, quieter, like something had been taken out of it. Charlotte helped Ava back into the car without another word. No eye contact, no acknowledgement, just distance. Control, restored the only way she knew how, by shutting everything else out. The engine started clean this time. Ethan had fixed that part at least, but as the SUV pulled away, tires crunching against gravel, the silence it left behind felt heavier than the storm had. Lily stepped forward slowly, looking up at her dad. "She was okay before," she said, her voice small. "What happened?" Ethan didn't answer. Because he didn't trust himself to. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the light inside the garage faded into shadow, a different kind of knock came at the door. Not a customer, not someone looking for help. A man in a clean suit stood there, holding a thin envelope. "Ethan Cole?" he asked. Ethan nodded slowly. The man handed it over without expression. "You've been formally notified. No explanation, no conversation, just procedure." Ethan looked down at the paper in his hands. Cease and desist. Neurostride Technologies. Immediate compliance required. Legal action pending. His grip tightened slightly. Because this wasn't just about a mistake anymore. This wasn't about one failed attempt. This was bigger. He wasn't just wrong. He wasn't just out of his depth. He was now a problem. A liability. And problems like that didn't get chances to try again. The garage felt different that night. Not just quiet. Empty, like something invisible had been pulled out of it, leaving behind a space that didn't quite belong to him anymore. The tools were still there. The workbench, the faint smell of oil and metal that had always made the place feel steady, predictable. But now it all felt uncertain. Ethan sat on the edge of the bench, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the scattered pieces of the brace in front of him, taken apart, again, but this time not with purpose, with doubt. He turned one of the joints slowly in his hand, replaying the moment over and over. The step, the shift, the collapse. He could see it perfectly, every angle, every mistake. Too much correction too quickly. Not enough time for her body to adjust. He knew better. That was the part that stayed with him. Not that he tried and failed, but that he rushed when it mattered most. Because of pressure. Because of expectations. Because, deep down, he wanted to prove something. And Ava paid for it. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, exhaling through tension that wouldn't leave his chest. For a second, it wasn't Ava he saw. It was Jake. That same helpless feeling. That same moment where everything slows down just enough for you to realize you didn't fix it. You didn't save them. You weren't enough. The thought hit harder now than it had in years, because this time he had let himself believe things could be different, that maybe he could actually change something. But reality didn't bend just because you wanted it to. And now, everything was on the line. The envelope sat off to the side of the bench, still open. He didn't need to read it again. He already knew what it meant. Shut down. Step back. Stay in your place. If he pushed this any further, it wouldn't just be his idea at risk. It would be everything. The garage, the house, the fragile stability he'd spent years holding together piece by piece. And Lily, Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, because none of this was supposed to reach her. None of it was supposed to touch her world. But things like this didn't stay contained. They leaked into conversations, into silence, into the way he looked at bills he couldn't ignore anymore. The door creaked softly behind him. Ethan didn't turn right away. He already knew who it was. Lily stepped inside slowly, her small footsteps careful against the concrete floor. She held her tablet close to her chest, like she wasn't sure if she should even be there. "I saw the message," she said quietly. Ethan looked up, confusion flickering across his face. "What message?" She walked closer and turned the screen toward him. A video. At first, he didn't understand what he was looking at. Then it clicked. It was him. Last night. Working. Head down, hands moving slower than usual, shoulders heavier than he realized, pausing every few minutes like his body was trying to catch up with what his mind refused to stop doing. He hadn't even known she was recording. The lighting was dim, the angle slightly off, but the exhaustion was clear. So was the effort. Lily tapped the screen again, showing the caption she had written underneath. "My dad won't give up on her, even if everyone else did." Ethan's eyes shifted slightly. Views. Thousands already. Comments scrolling faster than he could read. People reacting, sharing, asking questions. He didn't feel relief, didn't feel excitement, but something moved inside him. Small, unsteady, like something that hadn't fully formed yet. "Lily," he started, not sure what he was going to say. She stepped forward before he could finish and wrapped her arms tightly around him. "I know you didn't hurt her," she said into his shoulder. Ethan froze for a second, then slowly, his hand came up, resting gently against her back. "I messed up," he said quietly. Lily shook her head against him. "You tried." That word landed differently. Tried. It sounded simple, but it wasn't. Trying meant you hadn't quit. Trying meant you hadn't quit. Trying meant you were still in it. Trying meant there was still something left to give. Ethan let out a slow breath, his grip tightening slightly as if grounding himself in that moment. Because the fear hadn't gone anywhere. If anything, it had gotten heavier. The risk was real now, clear. One wrong step forward and everything could fall apart, not just for him, for her. And that changed everything. Ethan pulled back slightly, looking down at Lily. Her eyes were steady, certain, the same way they always were when she looked at him. Like there wasn't a version of the world where he didn't figure things out, where he didn't fix what was broken. And that belief, it wasn't something he could hide from anymore. It wasn't something he could quietly carry without answering. Because now, it wasn't just about whether he could do this. It was about what happened if he stopped. Ethan glanced back at the brace pieces on the table, then at the envelope, then back at Lily. The choice wasn't clear. The path forward wasn't safe. But for the first time since everything fell apart, he realized something. The fear wasn't about losing the garage. It wasn't about the legal threat. It wasn't even about failing again. It was about one thing: walking away. Because if he did, if he stopped now, then Lily would see it. She would feel it. And that belief she carried so naturally would crack. Ethan swallowed slightly, the weight of that settling in. And suddenly, failing didn't feel like the worst thing anymore. Quitting did. The video went viral overnight. Millions watched. Millions shared. Millions commented. Everyone had an opinion. Questions flooded social media about the brace, about neurostride, about how something so important had been overlooked. Charlotte saw it too. At first, her face burned with anger. How dare this single dad expose a flaw she had ignored? How dare he challenge the system she built? She replayed the video, again and again. Not the comments, not the internet's judgment. It was Ethan, his patience, his calm, his refusal to give up. Something didn't add up. He wasn't reckless. He hadn't cut corners. He had cared, fully, completely. The realization hit her like a punch. It wasn't Ethan. It was them, the system, a design flaw hidden behind efficiency metrics, a mistake no one had admitted, a child left waiting for someone to notice. Charlotte's pride wrestled with the truth. And then she made a choice, a public choice. At a scheduled company presentation, the auditorium was packed. Employees, investors, and journalists filled every seat. The lights glared, cameras flashed, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Charlotte walked onto the stage, holding Ava's small hand. The room murmured. Gasps spread as she continued walking toward Ethan. He stood at the side, calm but alert, heart pounding in his chest. The CEO paused, and then she invited him forward. Silence fell. Under the bright lights, with dozens of eyes watching, Ethan stepped up. The moment felt impossible, pressure wrapped around him like a vice. But he didn't flinch. Ava looked up at him, eyes wide with trust. Charlotte nodded, and then, under every flash and gaze, the truth came out. Ethan explained the brace. He showed the adjustments, the way a simple fix could restore Ava's mobility. Every motion precise, every word clear, and the audience watched in awe. The flaw wasn't Ethan's work. It was theirs. Corporate shortcuts, oversight, efficiency prioritized over care. Charlotte's chest tightened. The moment demanded something she had never done before. Something terrifying, something human. "I was wrong," she said. The words echoed in the auditorium. Shock ran through the crowd. Whispers became murmurs. Phones stopped recording. It wasn't just an apology. It was recognition. Validation. A single dad proving that dedication, patience, and quiet courage could expose truths no authority could ignore. Ethan exhaled slowly, letting the tension slip away. He hadn't done it for glory, but the relief, the acknowledgement, washed over him anyway. Ava smiled, small, shy, but full of wonder. She had believed in him. And now the world did too. Charlotte looked at Ethan and saw something she hadn't expected. Respect. Real, earned, undeniable respect. The audience rose, applauding, cheering, capturing the moment with every phone camera. And in that applause, Ethan knew something important. This wasn't about the video, or the views, or proving someone wrong. It was about doing right by a child. About standing firm when no one else would. About integrity that couldn't be bought or ignored. And for a single dad, that was victory enough. The lights dimmed. The presentation ended. Cameras still clicked, but the story was already out there, viral, undeniable, true. For Ethan, for Ava, for anyone who had ever doubted themselves, the lesson was simple. Patience, care, and quiet courage always matter. Always. Everything had changed. But change didn't happen overnight. Charlotte moved quickly. The faulty product line was shut down. A full investigation launched. Every corner of the company examined. Every decision questioned. And then she offered Ethan something unexpected. A role, not as an employee, not as someone to follow orders, but as a collaborator. Ethan froze. He had never done anything for recognition. He hadn't wanted a title, a plaque, or applause. He wanted results. He wanted to see Ava walk, to see her smile, to see her live without limits. And now, for the first time, he could make that happen on a bigger scale. Together, he and Charlotte redesigned Neurostride. Safer, stronger, real. Every detail examined, every step tested. Ava became their first success story. She walked, then she ran, laughing, free. And this time it lasted. Ethan's garage didn't close. It didn't vanish into obscurity. It evolved into a place bigger than a workshop, bigger than braces or repairs. It became a place where people came for more than just fixes. They came for second chances, for hope, for someone who refused to give up when the world had already counted them out. Neighbors started stopping by. Families brought children. Veterans came for support. Innovators came to test new ideas. And Ethan, quiet, steadfast, single dad, found himself at the center of something larger than he'd ever imagined. A community built on trust, on patience, on care. Ava looked up at him one evening, smiling after another successful trial run. "Thanks, Dad," she whispered. And for Ethan, that was enough. Recognition had never been the goal. Results were. And now the results were visible in every life touched, every step taken, every smile earned. The garage had grown. The man had grown. And the girl, she had flown. Sometimes a single dad could change the world quietly. One child, one brace, one choice at a time. And in that quiet, steadfast way, he had. The lake was calm that evening. Golden light stretched across the water, turning every ripple into liquid gold. Ava skipped stones, laughing every time one bounced farther than the last. Ethan sat on the shore, quiet, watching. Patient, steady. Ava ran along the shoreline free, unstoppable, alive. No braces, no hesitation. Just movement, just life. She slowed near him, breath coming in deep, even gasps. She smiled, bright and honest. "You didn't fix my legs," she said softly. Ethan shook his head, a small smile touching his lips. "I didn't," he said. "I just made sure someone noticed. That's all anyone ever needed." Lily came running back, arms wrapping around his shoulder. He hugged her tight, feeling the weight of all the struggles, the sleepless nights, the doubts all melting away in this one moment. Home wasn't perfect. It never had been. But it was enough. Safe, loving, real. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan believed that the world could still be changed quietly. By care, by patience, by one small act of steadfast courage. Ava ran past him again, laughing, skipping another stone. The sound echoed across the lake, bouncing back with promise, hope, and joy. Ethan breathed in the evening air, watching her move, knowing he had done more than build a brace. He had built a future. Sometimes being a father meant showing up when no one else would, and sometimes that was enough to change everything. Golden light fading, he looked down at Lily. "Come on," he said. "Let's head home." And together they walked back. A life rebuilt. A family renewed. A single dad who had quietly made the impossible possible. If this story touched you, subscribe to Just Dad Things for more single dad stories, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.